The rain fell harder than I had ever seen before. It was like tiny needles poking everything, bouncing off cars and splashing up from the roads. The sound of the rain hitting my small umbrella was loud and steady, like a drumbeat that made me feel nervous. I stood by the road, hoping for a tricycle to come and save me from the soaking storm, but none appeared. The street was busy, but everyone seemed to be rushing past me, hidden under their umbrellas or safely inside their cars. That's when he appeared. A shiny black car rolled toward me, its tires splashing water as it slowed down. The tinted window on the passenger side slid down, and I saw him. He was tall and dark-skinned, with strong features that made him look like someone out of a storybook. His jawline was sharp, and his eyes seemed to cut through the storm, looking straight at me. He leaned closer to the window, and his deep, smooth voice rang out, clear even through the rain. "Hey, hop in. Let me give you a ride," he said, his voice calm and kind. I froze for a moment. Stories I'd heard about strangers flashed through my mind, scary ones about people getting into cars and never being seen again. My heart pounded, and I wasn't sure if I should trust him. But then, I looked at the sky. The rain was coming down harder, and I knew there was no way a tricycle would show up anytime soon. I couldn't stay there forever. I hesitated, then raised my hand to wave at him. He saw me through his mirror and stopped the car. As the car backed up toward me, my small umbrella struggled against the wind. I quickly closed it and made my way to the car. Rainwater dripped from my coat and hair as I opened the door and got in. The warmth of the car hit me like a cozy blanket after being out in the cold storm. "Thank you," I said softly, trying not to show how nervous I was. "Don't mention it," he replied with a smile that was so genuine it almost melted my fears. His skin seemed to glow under the soft lights of the car. I glanced at him, just for a second, and my heart skipped. He looked so confident, like someone who had everything under control. I told him where I needed to go, my voice shaky at first but growing steadier as we talked. He listened and nodded, his hands steady on the wheel as he drove through the rain-soaked streets. The car felt safe, and I started to relax just a little. Every now and then, we exchanged small laughs, and I couldn't help but feel a strange calmness. But deep down, I was still praying silently, asking God to keep me safe. By the time we reached my stop, the rain had slowed to a light drizzle. The streetlights reflected off the wet road, making everything shimmer. He pulled up to the curb, and I reached for the door handle. "Can I get your number?" he asked, his voice soft but confident. I paused. Should I? Part of me still felt unsure, but something about him made me want to say yes. I gave him my number, and he smiled again before driving off into the misty rain. That night, as I lay in my small, quiet room, I couldn't stop thinking about him. His voice, his smile, the way he made me feel safe even when I was scared, it all played over and over in my head. Was it a coincidence that he showed up, or was it something more? My thoughts swirled like the rain outside my window. Then my phone buzzed. It was him. Desmond. Hearing his voice on the other end of the call made my heart race. This wasn't just any man. This was Desmond, the one who had appeared like a hero on a rainy day, and I felt like my life had just started to change forever. The days after that rainy evening felt like they were pulled straight out of a dream. Desmond started calling me every evening, his voice warm and full of life. Every conversation we had felt like a page from a book I couldn't stop reading. He was charming, thoughtful, and knew just how to make me laugh. I began to look forward to hearing his voice at the end of each day, as if it was the glue holding my moments together. One evening, about a week after we first met, my phone rang again, and I answered quickly, my heart already racing. "Hey, beautiful," he said smoothly, his voice like music that only I could hear. I couldn't help but blush. "Hi, Desmond," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm even though my cheeks were burning. "I was thinking," he said, "why don't we meet up for coffee tomorrow? I'd love to see you again." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because the idea of seeing him again made me feel nervous and excited all at once. "Okay," I finally said. "Where should we meet?" The next day, I spent hours getting ready. I tried on different outfits, fixed my hair, and even practiced my smile in the mirror. By the time I left for the little cafe we had agreed on, my palms were sweating, and my stomach was full of butterflies. When I arrived, Desmond was already there, sitting at a table by the window. He stood up as soon as he saw me, his tall frame towering over everyone else in the room. He smiled that same charming smile, and I felt my heart flutter. He pulled out a chair for me, and we began talking as if we'd known each other forever. Desmond had a way of making everything he said sound interesting. He told me about his childhood, growing up as the youngest in his family, and how his mother was his biggest supporter. He talked about his work, his dreams, and the things he loved. Every word he spoke pulled me deeper into his world. And when he asked about me, he listened like what I had to say was the most important thing in the world. We stayed at the cafe until the sun started to set, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. When it was time to leave, Desmond offered to walk me home. As we walked through the quiet streets, he kept glancing at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't quite name. When we reached my door, he stopped and turned to face me. "I had a great time," he said, his voice softer now. "I'd like to see you again." I nodded, unable to speak as my cheeks flushed. He smiled, then said goodnight and walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling like the luckiest person in the world. The weeks that followed were filled with moments like this. Desmond took me out on dates that felt like adventures, each one more exciting than the last. We went to the movies, strolled through parks, and even spent an afternoon at the beach, where we laughed until our sides hurt. With every passing day, I felt myself falling for him more and more. Desmond wasn't just kind and thoughtful, he was also incredibly attentive. He noticed the little things about me, how I liked my tea, the way I always tapped my foot when I was nervous, and even the songs I hummed absent-mindedly. He made me feel seen in a way no one ever had before. One evening, as we sat on a bench overlooking the city lights, he turned to me with a serious look in his eyes. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice steady but quiet. My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I've never felt this way about anyone before. You're different, special. I don't want to rush things, but I also don't want to lose you. Would you be my girlfriend?" The sincerity in his voice made my chest tighten. I nodded, a smile spreading across my face. "Yes," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Being Desmond's girlfriend was like living in a fairy tale. He treated me like a queen, always going out of his way to make me happy. He introduced me to his friends, who welcomed me warmly, and even talked about his plans for the future, which now included me. It all felt too good to be true. But there was one thing that stood out. Desmond often talked about his mother. He mentioned how close they were and how much she meant to him. At first, it seemed sweet. He was a family man, and I admired that. But sometimes, the way he spoke about her felt a little different. He described her as his best friend, his rock, and the person who knew him better than anyone else. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, he loved her, and that was a good thing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that his bond with her was unusually strong. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a story that would change my life forever. Life with Desmond felt like a dream come true, at least for a while. He was attentive, charming, and made me feel like the luckiest woman alive. But like every dream, reality eventually began to creep in, and with it came the first cracks in our perfect world. It all started when Desmond invited me to his house for the first time. I was nervous but excited. Meeting his family felt like a big step, and I was eager to make a good impression. Desmond had always talked about his mother, so I knew she was an important part of his life. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience. Desmond's house was beautiful, with large windows that let in plenty of light and a garden that looked like it belonged in a magazine. When we walked in, the scent of freshly baked bread filled the air, and I could hear soft music playing in the background. His mother was waiting in the living room, a small, elegant woman with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "So, this is the young lady who has stolen my son's heart," she said, her voice warm but with an edge that made me feel like I was being examined under a microscope. "Yes, Mum," Desmond said, his voice softening in a way I hadn't heard before. He walked over to her and kissed her cheek. "This is Ella." I stepped forward and smiled, trying to hide my nervousness. "It's so nice to meet you, She waved her hand dismissively. "Call me Mama Desmond. Everyone does." We sat down, and for the next hour, I did my best to answer her questions, which ranged from polite to deeply personal. She wanted to know about my family, my job, and even how I planned to support Desmond in his career. Her tone was friendly, but her questions felt like tests, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being judged. By the time I left, my head was spinning. Desmond walked me to the car, holding my hand as if he could sense my unease. "She's just protective," he said, his voice full of reassurance. "She'll warm up to you." I nodded, though a part of me wasn't so sure. Things started to change after that visit. Desmond's mother began visiting us more often, and when she did, it was like the entire house revolved around her. She had a way of commanding attention, and Desmond gave it to her willingly. He would sit with her for hours, talking and laughing, while I watched from the sidelines. The first time she stayed with us for a week, I thought it was sweet. She hasn't seen him in a while, I told myself. It's natural for them to want to spend time together. But as the days went by, I started to feel invisible. One night, after dinner, I went upstairs to our bedroom, expecting Desmond to join me soon. But when he didn't come, I went back downstairs. There he was, lying on the couch with his head on his mother's lap, like a little boy who needed comfort. My heart sank. "Desmond," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Aren't you coming to bed?" He looked at me, almost confused. "No, babe. I'm staying here with Mum tonight." His words hit me like a slap. I didn't say anything, just turned and went back to the bedroom. But as I lay there alone, I couldn't stop the questions swirling in my mind. Was this normal? Was I overreacting? Or was there something wrong with our relationship? The pattern continued every time she visited. Desmond would spend all his time with her, leaving me feeling like an outsider in my own home. When I finally confronted him about it, he looked genuinely surprised. "She's my mother, Ella," he said, as if that explained everything. "She's been there for me my whole life. I can't just ignore her." "I'm not asking you to ignore her," I said, my voice shaking. "But what about me? What about us?" Desmond sighed and pulled me into a hug. "I'm sorry, babe. I'll do better. I promise." And for a while, he did. But the cracks were still there, and they were growing wider. When Desmond proposed, I convinced myself that things would get better once we were married. The wedding was a spectacle, beautiful, grand, and unforgettable. Guests laughed and cheered as Desmond and I exchanged vows, promising each other a lifetime of love and commitment. The cameras flashed, music filled the air, and the happiness on everyone's faces mirrored my own. For that day, I truly believed we were embarking on a fairy tale journey. But by the time the reception was over, and we headed to our hotel suite, the fairy tale began to lose its shine. I was brimming with anticipation, my heart fluttering at the thought of spending our first night as husband and wife. But Desmond seemed distracted. He was glued to his phone, his fingers flying across the screen as he texted someone. "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Mum," he said without looking up. She wanted to know if we got to the hotel safely. I forced a smile. "That's sweet of her." He nodded, still focused on his phone. Minutes turned into hours, and Desmond showed no sign of putting the phone down. Eventually, I climbed into bed, pretending not to feel the ache of disappointment in my chest. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that he finally joined me, and even then, he kept his distance. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and unanswered questions. Desmond acted as if nothing was wrong, going about his day with the same charm and ease that had drawn me to him in the first place. But something had shifted between us. I felt it in the silence that stretched between conversations, in the way he avoided my touch, and in the way he always seemed to prioritize his mother over me. It wasn't just the wedding night. Weeks turned into months, and our marriage remained unconsummated. I tried everything: romantic dinners, heartfelt conversations, even subtle hints, but Desmond seemed completely uninterested. Whenever I brought it up, he would brush it off with a laugh or change the subject entirely. One evening, after another failed attempt to connect with him, I called my mother. Tears streamed down my face as I poured out my frustrations. "Ella, this isn't normal," she said firmly. "You need to find out what's going on." "I've tried, Mum," I said, my voice breaking. "He won't talk about it. And whenever I bring it up, he just shuts me out." "Then you need help," she said. "This isn't something you can fix on your own." The next day, my mother took me to see a pastor. He was a soft-spoken man with kind eyes that seemed to see right through me.
If you've watched up to this moment, and you love what you're seeing, please do well to use this little moment to subscribe, like and drop a comment for us. It means a lot to us in our growth journey. Thank you.
After listening to my story, he leaned back in his chair and let out a deep sigh. "Ella," he said gently, "your husband is physically married to you, but spiritually, he is married to his mother." The words hit me like a lightning bolt. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It means that his bond with his mother is more than just a strong connection," the pastor explained. "It's unnatural, unhealthy. And until that bond is broken, he will never be fully yours." The pastor's words lingered in my mind as I returned home. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. Desmond's relationship with his mother had always seemed a little too close, but I had ignored the warning signs, convincing myself that it was just a sign of his loyalty and love for his family. Now, those signs felt like glaring red flags. I tried to talk to Desmond about what the pastor had said, but he laughed it off. "That's ridiculous, Ella," he said. "Mum and I are close, sure, but there's nothing wrong with that." "But Desmond," I pressed, "don't you think it's strange that you spend more time with her than with me? That you tell her everything before you tell me?" He sighed and pulled me into a hug. "You're overthinking this, babe. Mum is important to me, but so are you. You're my wife." His words were sweet, but they felt hollow. Actions speak louder than words, and Desmond's actions told a different story. The tension in our marriage continued to grow. Desmond's mother visited more frequently, often staying for weeks at a time. During her visits, Desmond was completely devoted to her, leaving me to fend for myself. I felt like a guest in my own home, watching from the sidelines as they laughed and talked like old friends. One night, after another lonely dinner, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until his mother went to bed, then confronted Desmond in the living room. "Desmond, this isn't working," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "We're married, but it doesn't feel like it. You spend more time with your mother than you do with me. We haven't even." I trailed off, unable to say the words out loud. Desmond looked at me, his expression a mix of confusion and guilt. "Ella, I'm doing the best I can. You know how much Mum means to me. She's been there for me my whole life. And what about me?" I shot back, my voice rising. "I'm supposed to be your wife, Desmond. Your partner. But it feels like I'm just someone you live with." He didn't have an answer. Instead, he apologized, promising to do better. But deep down, I knew that things wouldn't change. The bond between Desmond and his mother was too strong, too deeply rooted to break. The tension in our marriage became impossible to ignore. Desmond and I existed under the same roof, but it felt as though we were living on different planets. The once charming man who had swept me off my feet was now a stranger, bound to someone else in ways I couldn't understand. His mother's visits grew more frequent, her presence like a shadow that loomed over every corner of our home. And with every passing day, I felt myself slipping further away from the man I had once loved. One evening, after another silent dinner, I decided to confront Desmond once and for all. The words I had been holding back for months finally spilled out, sharp and raw. "Desmond, I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice trembling. "This isn't a marriage. You treat me like a roommate, not a wife. And every time your mother is here, it's like I don't even exist." He looked up from his plate, startled by the force of my words. "Ella, what are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice rising. "We've been married for years, and we haven't started a family. You don't talk about having kids, you don't spend time with me, and every decision you make revolves around your mother. It's like she's the real woman in your life, not me." Desmond's face hardened, his usual calm demeanor giving way to something colder. "She's my mother, Ella. She's been there for me my whole life. I can't just abandon her because you're feeling insecure." "Insecure?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "This isn't about insecurity, Desmond. This is about respect. About commitment. I'm your wife, but you don't treat me like one." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what you want me to do." "I want you to choose," I said, the words hanging heavy in the air. "It's either me or her. Because I can't live like this anymore." Desmond stared at me, his eyes filled with a mix of frustration and sadness. "That's not fair, Ella. You're asking me to choose between the two most important people in my life." "No, Desmond," I said quietly. "I'm asking you to honor the vows you made to me, to put our marriage first. If you can't do that, then what are we even doing?" The days that followed were tense and silent. Desmond avoided me, retreating into his own world. I tried to keep myself busy, but the weight of our unspoken conflict pressed down on me like a storm cloud. It wasn't until his mother arrived for another visit that the storm finally broke. She came into the house with her usual flair, her voice loud and cheerful as she greeted Desmond. He lit up at the sight of her, his earlier coldness toward me completely forgotten. I watched from the kitchen as they laughed and talked, their bond as unbreakable as ever. That night, as I lay alone in bed, I made a decision. I couldn't continue living like this. I loved Desmond, but love wasn't enough to sustain a marriage. Not when I felt like I was constantly fighting for his attention, his respect, his love. The next morning, I packed a small bag and called my mother. "I'm coming home," I said, my voice steady. "I can't do this anymore." My mother didn't ask questions. She simply said, "Come. We'll talk when you get here." When Desmond came home that evening, he found me waiting for him in the living room, my bag by my side. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice firm. He stared at me, shocked. "Ella, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I've been alone in this marriage for years," I said. "You've made your choice, Desmond. And it's not me." He took a step toward me, his expression panicked. "Ella, wait. Don't do this. We can fix this." "No, Desmond," I said, shaking my head. "You can't fix something you're not willing to admit is broken." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity. I loved Desmond, but I loved myself more. And I deserved to be with someone who would love me the same way. Leaving wasn't easy. There were days when I missed Desmond so much it hurt. But as the weeks turned into months, I began to find myself again. I reconnected with friends, threw myself into my work, and started therapy to process everything I had been through. Slowly, I started to heal. One day, months after I had left, I received a call from Desmond. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said, his voice hesitant. "I've realized a lot of things about myself, about us. I want to make things right." His words stirred something in me, but I knew better than to let my heart lead me blindly again. "That's good, Desmond," I said. "I hope you find what you're looking for." He was silent for a moment before saying, "I just want you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a strange sense of peace. Desmond's journey was his own, and so was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt free.